Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. For my new subscribers, welcome to my dark world. I'm Angie and I hope you like the stories. Today I made a compilation of scary stories to relax you and help you sleep. And because a lot of you requested a speed drawing video, I added 3 old speed drawing videos since I didn't have the time to film a new one because right now I'm in the middle of moving to a new house. But new videos will come soon, I promise. The artworks you see me creating in this video are available as prints in my shop. Just follow the link below and it will take you there. As always, grab your flashlight and follow me into the darkness. When I was a kid, my friend and I got bored during a dinner party my parents were hosting. So we messed around in my dad's painting studio. We somehow ended up getting a streak of white paint across a family portrait my dad was working on. Since it wasn't a Pollock's abstract painting, the streak was very obvious. We were obviously freaked out and ran off. Then we had the brilliant idea of taking the parents to the studio so we can pin the blame on one of them. So, we herded the parents into the studio to let them take a look. And guess what? The streak is gone. Now, we were even more freaked out. The painting's a bit complicated, so getting rid of that streak across it would take time. And it couldn't have been more than an hour since the incident happened. There was no trace of the streak anywhere. I lost touch with those friends for a while, and when we met again with one of them for the first time in about 15 years, the first thing he said was, "Remember the freaky incident at your parents' place with the painting? Have you ever figured out what the hell happened?" Of course, my dad could secretly have some speed painting ability, somehow managed to sneak away from dinner and fixed everything without telling us to mess with our heads. But screw it, to me, it's going to be one of the great unsolved mysteries in my life. I live in a very old house, one of the oldest standing in my town. One morning, when I was 13, I woke up and walked down the hallway to get to my kitchen. On the way, I passed my parents' bedroom. I was half asleep, so I didn't notice anything wrong, till I came back with my cereal. Their door, which they keep closed, had 2 of its panels cracked down the middle, and was also knocked off its hinges. The lock mechanism was also destroyed. I was just terrified at what the hell had happened. I asked my parents right then what had happened. Apparently, in the middle of the night, a pounding just started at the door. Not knowing what was banging on their door in the middle of the night, they locked the door. The banging continued till the panels started to crack. Paint chipped and fell to the floor. The banging continued. The top hinge of the door breaks off. Mind you, this is an old house with heavy wooden doors. Scared shitless, my parents pressed up against the door, trying to keep whatever it was out of the room. Then they were knocked back by a powerful push and onto their bed and the floor. The lock was ripped out of the wall, bringing shards of wood down with it. What was left of the door was pushed open, and there I was. I whispered, "A door won't keep us out." Turning and sleepwalked back to my room. I have no recollection of anything. I also had no bruises, which I thought was strange, seeing as I bashed a door down. I still live in the house, and nothing like that has ever happened since. I do not remember dreaming about anything that night. I have a ghost that occasionally visits me in my sleep and tells me things that either are about to happen or things that people are hiding from me. It is a female, and from the looks of what she is wearing, she is either from the 30s or 40s. A few things I can recall off the top of my head. When I was in high school, she told me that one of my friends was going to break his leg playing a sport he usually doesn't. Next day, this happened. She told me that a girl I had a crush on was going to give me her number. It happened 2 days later. She told me when both of my dogs were going to die. She now also shows their spirits to me. They haven't left the house. They still act the same, as if they were alive. Now, the creepiest one for me is that about 3 months ago, she told me that I was missing a female figure in my life. I questioned her, saying that if I should be married or something, and she laughed and said it was family and that I should ask my mother. I asked my mother about this, and it turns out she had a miscarriage about 2 years before she had me. It was supposed to be a girl.
I was grade 9 or 10. I can't exactly remember some of it due to memory loss, and it was just a boring day. We were all doing work and we got an announcement saying we were having code black, which is a code for lockdown. I wanted a purple to happen, which is a bomb threat, but it'd probably be dead. We all put our work aside and sat at our desks, considering our classroom was small. I thought, fuck yeah, this is awesome, no work. I was always like that whenever we had a fire alarm go off, but I knew it could be serious, and I had to be sensible and listen to my teacher in case something really bad happened. I wasn't scared, but I thought being in lockdown for this long getting a bit freaky. I kept trying to look out of the classroom door and see if I could see anyone outside of the foyer. I could not see a thing, and there were no sounds of forced entry. I was starting to get bored after a bit and a little annoyed. I thought, if the guy's been caught, then let's get on with the day. And then finally got the all clear announcement and we all got back to work. At lunch I was chatting to my friend. Rumors going about some prick from our grade, who we hate, held the assistant principal up at knife point, and apparently he had a list of people he wanted to kill, including my friend I was chatting with. I think he got expelled and sucked into him. Since then, we never had another lockdown. This event happened when I was 13. I think it was around maybe September or October. Well, anyway, this is my story. It was a Thursday evening around 7 p.m. My parents were going out for the evening. My mother was going to her exercise classes, and my dad was in football training with my brother. I have always been a bit of a scaredy cat. I never used to go upstairs alone in the dark. I was always paranoid, and I was always scared of being home. But it was better than standing on a cold field in the rain, I guess. Well, anyway, I was sitting in my living room playing The Sims. I was obsessed with it. A few hours had passed, and I was still at my computer desk. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. I was always told to ignore it if anyone came to the door when I was home alone. Even if I was allowed, my fear of strangers would have kept me from opening it anyway. I turned off the volume of my game and waited for the person to go away. Less than a minute later, the bell rang again and again. At this point, I started to get scared. Usually, if we are expecting someone, my mother will text me or phone me, but I hadn't been informed on any visitors. I decided to turn off all the lights and sat in silence. I lived in a sketchy area with some dodgy people, so that didn't help. Suddenly, I heard a knock on the kitchen window, which was around the side of the house. At this point, I was freaking out. I ran to my bathroom, as it was the only room in the house that had a lock, so I locked myself in and hid in the shower with my phone. I stayed silent for a while until I heard a clatter, and then my backyard security light turned on. Someone was in my garden. I could see a silhouette through the window. I broke out into a cold sweat and phoned my mother. I knew she would not answer because she wouldn't hear the phone over the music in her class. I rang my dad, but to my shock, I heard a phone ringing from in the kitchen. He had left his phone behind. I instantly hung up. I stayed there for a while, crouched in a ball. I could hear footsteps and rummaging. At that moment, my heart stopped. I had left the back door unlocked. I knew I had to run to lock it, or else they would come inside. I unlocked the door, sprinted to the living room, and there he was, standing on the other side of the glass and the large bay windows. He just stood there, staring at me. I was frozen. Suddenly, I heard a car pull up outside. My mom was home. The man must have panicked and jumped over the fence. I remained standing there. Let's just say that was the last time I stayed home alone in a long time.
This happened a couple of years ago when I was a senior in high school living in Southern California. It was later in the evening, sometime between 8 to 8:30, and my mom and I had just gotten home from a long day of driving and visiting family to discover that our cat was completely out of food. I was tired of being in the car and did not want to go to the pet shop to get cat food. My mom begged me to go with her, so I finally caved in and said yes. Looking back now, I am so grateful that I did, because if I hadn't decided to go, I think there's a good chance my mom would have never came home. Another important detail I want to mention is that the windows of the car my mom had were extremely tinted, making it pretty much impossible to see into the car. So we pull into the parking lot, and I look around and notice there's only a few other cars, with one parked a few rows to the back of us. My mom says I can wait in the car since she is just going in real quick to pick up the food. A minute after my mom walks out of the car and is halfway to the store, the car that was parked a few rows back pulls up in the spot right next to our car on the passenger side. I think it's a little strange, but think maybe the person wanted a closer spot to the store. A man steps out of the car and gets his big German Shepherd out of the back of his car and walks into the store. I'm looking inside the store and notice this guy is watching my mom and following her around, but enough for her to notice. He gets ahead of her in line, and after he checks out, he stands outside the entrance and is watching her check out. My mom walks out of the store and the guy starts walking behind her. At this point, I'm starting to get a really bad feeling and I am very creeped out. When my mom makes it back to our car, she opens the back to put the cat food, and the guy opens the back of his car right next to ours and starts talking to her and motioning for her to come look at something in the back of his car. My mom, being completely oblivious, takes a few steps over and is looking into the back of his car. His hands start to move towards his waist, and I immediately start yelling for her to get into the car right now. The guy looks super shocked, as I'm guessing he never saw me in the car, and stops talking to her. My mom looks very confused, But after I yell at her some more to get into the car, she finally does. The creepy guy immediately gets into his car and drives off in a hurry. When my mom gets into the car, I asked her what that guy was saying to her, and she tells me he was telling her to look at something he got for his dog that was in the back of his car. I tell her everything I observed and that I am pretty sure he was trying to abduct her. Creepy pet shop guy, let's not meet ever again.
I live in the Black Hills area. Anyone who has been there knows it is a beautiful place to be outdoors in. One of my favorite things to do is backpack out there. For those that don't know, backpacking is a mess of hiking and camping. You take all the supplies you need to survive the time you'll be out there. It's tons of fun. So much so that most of my supplies basically never leave my car. I work a Monday-Friday job at 4 p.m. on Friday if the weather is supposed to be nice enough. I drive home, change, grab my dog, whatever supplies I need for the weekend, and I'm out of the door. The place I was going was relatively new to me. An elderly man had told me about it at one of the weekly meetups for outdoors enthusiasts. It was his first meeting there. It sounded right up my alley. A nice stream to fish at, and hardly any other people. I was so excited. I planned the trip for the upcoming weekend, even though it was supposed to snow on Sunday. The drive was weird. I followed the man's directions to the letter, and this road, I don't know, there were so many bends and curves. I felt like I was going in circles for hours. I finally found the trail I was supposed to be on. My dog didn't want to get out of the car. It took some coaxing, but she finally came out. It was odd. She loves being outdoors as much as I do. We set off down the winding trail. I found it growing cold, though the sun was still up. As I was hiking, I passed a seemingly abandoned two-story house. The windows were long gone, and the door was hanging by its hinges. I felt drawn to it. I can't explain the feeling. I walked inside it. Of course, the place was trashed. Piece of trash from other hikers. There was a strange symbol curved into what seemed to be every room of the house. An inverted pentagram with a lightning bolt. As I walked to inspect it closer, transfixed at how in some way this wasn't just graffiti, it was art. The edges, they were precise. It seemed flawless. A sudden and very loud woof jarred me from the trance I was in. My dog was looking very nervous. I left the house making a note to come back to it on my way back to the car. The sun was beginning to set, so I set up my camp along the trail. After I ate, I lay down in my tent. I woke up to hear shuffling outside, as if someone was packing back and forth outside my tent. I gripped the handle of my Glock 19, grabbed my flashlight, and planned to possibly have to shoot a mountain lion or a coyote. I zipped open the door. I shined my flashlight towards where I had heard the noise. Nothing was there. Just to be safe. Still nothing. I figured I had just imagined the noise. I checked my watch. It was 3:15 a.m. I had a few hours until I needed to get up. I crawled back into my tent and passed out, putting all thoughts of the strange noise out of my head. The next day was pretty uneventful, minus the mole-eyed raccoon I found. I found my next camping site about 3 miles from the previous one. Would you believe it? An actual ghost town. I had to say, I could not resist it. It gave me time to explore. I found some of the walls stained an old color. Most of the furniture rotted. What appeared to have been some kind of bar still had full liquor bottles. After I caught some fish for dinner, I decided it was time to relax for the evening. I laid out my sleeping bag in the least damaged house and prepared to get some sleep. It got cold quickly, so I threw some wood in the house's fireplace to help keep warm. I woke up the next morning, absolutely frozen. I looked out the broken window to see snow had fallen. Cursing to myself, I got up and began packing for the hike back. I did one last sweep around the house for anything I might have left. Turning to leave, I froze when I realized there were footprints in the snow all over, human ones. I don't scare easy, but that freaked me the hell out. My dog and I left in a hurry. We left so fast that I didn't even bother stopping at the first houses I'd seen. The elderly man didn't show up to any other meetings. I live in a small village in the very north of Scotland, so large shops and resources are a far distance. For that reason, I usually rely on internet shopping to get me my needs. I needed to buy a backpack for when I leave for university, one better than the one I already have. So, I turned to Craigslist, as I normally do. As a student, I prefer to go for the cheap option. Craigslist usually provides that. After looking for a short while, I came across a really good-looking bag at only £15. I thought this was an absolute steal, so I phoned the seller. Immediately, what struck me was this guy's accent. It was obvious he wasn't Scottish or even from the UK. He sounded Polish, I'm still not sure. He said he was from Glasgow. That's at least 5 hours by car from where I live. But when I told him the area I was, he offered to come to my house and give me the bag. Nonetheless, I foolishly gave him my fucking address. He said he'd drop by later on that day. Skipping forward about 7 hours to like 10 p.m., I was thinking that he wasn't going to come. At around 10:15 p.m., there was a chap at the door. Surprised that it was so late, I looked out the window to the front door, just to be sure, and sure enough, it was a young guy standing with a backpack in his hand. Slightly revealed that it wasn't a robber, I went to the door and opened up. It was the guy on the phone for sure. The accent confirmed it. He said, "Hey, here it is." I smiled and took out my wallet, taking out £30 because of the trouble he went to come here and the condition of the bag. He smiled and opened his arms as if he wanted a hug. Being a gay guy, I rarely turned down a hug and just assumed it was a cultural thing, so I hugged him back. I was still confused that he came all this way just for £15, but I didn't find it overly strange. Boy, was I wrong. At around midnight, I was finishing another episode of 24 and was ready to go to bed. From outside the house, I heard a car door shut, which was really weird for this time of the night and in my area. The nearest house is like a quarter-mile away, and I rarely see the people that live there. I paused the TV and went over to the window to see who it was. I recognized the car as being the green sedan that the guy had. But he wasn't there. No one was. It was at that point, when I heard the back gate opening, I fucking nearly shit myself. I ran quietly to the kitchen, where the back door is, staying low down the way there to avoid whoever it was seeing me from the kitchen window. I usually don't lock both doors till I go to bed, so both were still unlocked. I grabbed the keys from the counter and quickly locked the door. As I did, the security light turned on in the back garden. It's a motion sensor that turns it on. I looked up to see, and it was that guy again. He had a creepy smile on his face, no teeth showing, just a smile. I stood up and shouted, "Whoa, dude, what the fuck are you doing back there?" He said nothing and just smiled, looking directly at me. I found myself just staring at him until the situation actually kicked in, and I took the keys from the back door, then bolted to the front door to lock it. About halfway to the front door, I heard a window smash in the kitchen. My stomach ached at that fact that he's probably making his way into my house. I made a turn to go up the stairs towards the toilet so I could lock myself in there. When in the toilet, I heard him stumbling and broken glass falling to the floor. He was in my house. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and quickly called the police, told them of the situation as fast as I could, and they said they'll get officers out to me as fast as possible. The police station was just up from my village, so I knew someone would get there generally quick. The operator asked me to stay on the phone until someone arrived. I was focused on the guy's footsteps, which would slow down and speed up every so often. He eventually walked upstairs and tried to open the bathroom door. When he realized it was locked, he said, "Ah, I know you're in there, Cameron." Hearing him say my name made my stomach turn. I screamed, "The police are coming. Just back the fuck off, man." After saying that, he started to kick the door. I backed up against it with more strength than I knew I had. Then in the distance, I heard the sirens and the blue lights reflecting from the bathroom windows. He continued to kick the door, but then I heard the car doors outside open fast and footsteps. I heard the front door open and then, "Police officer, drop the knife." Again, I felt sick knowing he had a knife. It sounded as if he started running back downstairs. Then I heard taser and the guy screaming, then a thump. After he came through, they officially arrested him for attempted murder and trespassing. I have pressed charges, but the fact is, he won't get any more than 7 months in jail, and after that, he will be free to come right back. I am now trying to sell my house to get out of here as fast as possible.
This story happened in October of 2004, back when I was still a third-year high school student. My friends and I stuck around the school late at night. After our annual Halloween party, we had agreed to try out my friend's Ouija board. It wasn't the brightest idea, but we needed a thrill. We found a nice spot under a huge tree and proceeded with our ritual. There were 5 of us, 2 boys and 3 girls. We were all expecting some kind of paranormal contact. Rumors had it our school was haunted, but we've never really experienced anything firsthand. And it was Halloween, when all the spirits came out to play. We all wanted to get spooked. Also, we've never seen an Ouija board firsthand before, so we were pretty excited. Our school was an old Spanish colonial house, built in the 1800s, when the Spaniards still occupied the Philippines. We were in a section of the school that doesn't get used often, located beside a creepy old house. People only go there when they needed to use the restroom, store equipment on one of the sheds, or make out with their boyfriends or girlfriends. We sat down in the middle of an open space, with only an exposed bare bulb illuminating the surroundings. We were all having a laugh, scaring each other with what-if scenarios. It was your typical dumb kids doing dumb things. My friend who brought the Ouija board proceeded to place it in the middle of our circle. If I remember correctly, it was a glow-in-the-dark version, which we found hilarious, but it gave us the ability to see what was reading in the dark. Not knowing what to do and going after what we've seen in movies, we all proceeded to place our index finger on top of it. We sat there looking at each other until one of us said, "What's next?" We didn't know if there was a proper way to start the ritual, plus the board didn't come with instructions, so we decided to just throw in a question. "Is anyone there?" I called out into the darkness. "If there are spirits living here, please talk to us." One of the girls joined in. We clearly had no idea what we were doing. Still nothing. Not even the slightest bit of wind. One of my friends jerked it off, and the girls who brought the Ouija board screamed, breaking the silence. We all laughed at how ridiculous it was. After a bit of joking around, we decided to give it another go. We all placed our index fingers on it once more and asked, "If there's anyone there, we would like to make a contact." "Don't break the circle," one of my friends jokingly said. "Shut up," I whispered. We were just about ready to give up when the wind started to pick up. The stillness broke and the darkness around us seemed to move. Just a coincidence, we thought. "Okay, don't break the circle," I yelled out. "Is anyone there?" I was excited. It was like a scene from a movie with dirt and dead leaves swirling around us. "Guys, I'm scared," my friend sitting beside me said. "My mom warned me about playing with forces we don't know." "Did you die here? Were you killed during the war? Are you a hottie?" my friend giggled. At this point, we were all throwing random stupid questions. "Nothing. This is bullshit. I don't want to do this anymore," my friend said. We were all thinking the same. Started barking at us through the chain-link fence. These 6 dogs were growling and showing teeth. We all screamed, and without finishing the ritual, bolted right out of there. We didn't see each other until after Halloween, and this is where the story gets creepy. One of the girls told us about a weird experience she had the night after playing with the Ouija board. She had gotten home late after hanging out with her friends, when she realized she forgot the keys to her house. So she called her brother up, who was then still sharing a room with her, and what he said crept the hell out of her. He swore she was already home. He claimed to have seen her walking a while ago, and that she looked really tired and saw her head straight to bed. Creepy, but no need to freak ourselves out, was all we thought. Besides, her brother must have just been tired and saying things. But then my other friend started telling us about an encounter she had that Halloween night. She was going up to her room when the lights started flickering as she was ascending the staircase. Your typical horror movie visuals shrugged it off to faulty wiring. But just then she saw the door to her room open, and a dark figure stepped out and stood atop of the staircase. She couldn't make out the entity's face, but she recounted that she couldn't move and felt utter dread as the figure stared down at her. "No way!" my best friend, who had just joined in the conversation, said in disbelief. "Something happened to me as well." He recalled that he was sleeping one night when he woke up feeling really uncomfortable. He described his vision as having TV-like static, and a feeling of heaviness surrounded him. He looked around the room, and that's when he saw a bloody, charred face with piercing red eyes grinning at him through the window. I couldn't believe what I was hearing because I had almost run in with death that night. After the ritual, I was sleeping in our sedan on the way home. When I felt our car jerk, I woke up instantly, looking out the window. I found out that we've been hit by a huge oil tanker. I panicked and leaped out of the car. Luckily, my mom and I survived the crash, since the front of the car was a total wreck. I still don't have an explanation why those things happened to us, but thank God nothing happened after that. I never played or gotten near an Ouija board ever since. When I was little, I used to go down to my grandma's house for 2 weeks by myself. We'd roast some marshmallows out back in her huge yard, then come back inside and eat jellies and jams we'd made together. We'd sit on the porch and stare out down at the empty mountains that whistled to us through the pine trees. Her house was perched right close to the top of a mountain, and you could see the misty lake pooled at the bottom. In all my years, the only place that has ever matched the beauty of my grandma's house was the Banff National Park. At night, when the loons sang their song, I could almost hear the bugs skipping across the lake near her cabin. I'd beg my grandma to let me pitch a tent outside, and she would insist that she sleep out there with me and bring her tent out as well. I'd always agree, because truth be told, I was a little scared at first of her backyard. It was grass, flat and green, until you go to the edge of the yard, where tall trees showed up, taller than anything I'd ever seen before. They were planted almost 100 years ago by Boy Scouts. During the day, I'd run down the stairs if I wasn't sleeping in a tent, and the saint would have fresh cold cakes and berries waiting for me. We'd take them outside and eat them on the porch, and I'd tell her about all the places I'd been to. The crackling of the not-quite-dead fire pit would lull us as we rocked in the chairs, staring out at the vast expanse of land before us. The sky was a mixed palette of blues and faint greens, and the mountain line stretched for miles. I could see the tree that I jumped from into the lake. My grandma would hum softly. It was a game we played, her and I had to guess the tune. Was it going to be Junebug or Sweet Caroline? I always won. I think she let me. The room I stayed in was cozy and had a big bookshelf filled with all kinds of books from all over and from ages ago. I never touched any when I was really young. I was too little to read, and besides, I never really noticed them. The books were too high up anyways. That changed when I got old enough to read. I crawled up to the middle shelf and pulled down the book I thought looked interesting. It was some kind of survival book. I blew on it, 'cause I saw people do that with old books in movies. The front of the book said, "How to survive in the wilderness," surviving like the Indians, big books for little boys. There was a drawing of an eagle with 2 red lines drawn under each eye. I flipped to the first page. There was no table of contents, nothing. It just said, Chapter 1, How to Start a Fire from Scratch. I flipped through the book about halfway to see what other kinds of things it taught you. This chapter was titled Chapter 25, How to Make a Shelter. It featured a picture of a young Native American boy standing in front of a teepee. Cool, I breathed. I ran down the stairs, book in hand, excited to live out in the great wilderness. My necessities bag was lying next to the door. It was a big old leather backpack stuffed with my grandma's old compass, my grandma's pocket knife, a few pieces of rope, gum, penny candy, my med kit, a spare sweater, 2 full water bottles, and cans upon cans of fruit and meats. Tucked somewhere into the pocket was a lighter that none of the adults knew I had. I ran out into the forest out back. The sun was hot that day, and it beat down on me. I could feel the sticks crunching under my feet. The forest had gone quiet, which I had learned. There was an apex predator around. I remember how proud that made me feel. I turned around, shaking trees, shouting, knowing that every single thing in the forest was scared of me. It was great. I found a small flat area near the bank of the lake and set up camp. I plopped down on a big rock right in the sun, so I was nice and warm. I opened the book up to the first chapter and go to work reading. I gathered what you needed and small dry things. Within 2 hours, I had a huge pile of sticks in the middle of my clearing and a bunch of dried pine needles, the really long kind. Eventually, I was able to start a fire and I was ecstatic. I ran back through the forest to the house, which was about a 7-minute distance, and begged my grandma to let me spend the night out there. I told her that I had a knife, which was probably not going to help, but she seemed to feel better when I had it. After several minutes of my begging, she caved and said fine, but I had to keep my walkie-talkie on at all times. I think the reason she let me is because there isn't anyone living with a 50-mile radius of her home. I dragged a tent out there and pinched it. The fire was still going strong, but I added a few sticks to it just in case. The moon was shining eerily, blanketing my base in a chilly blue glow. The lake was pitch black, and the stars were shining so brightly they were mirrored in the still water. Trees on every side of me stretched like mammoths towards the sky. I decided to try out some night swimming, and I slowly waded into the water. The warmth was surprising and pleasant. It was a welcome change from the crisp air. The world around me was silent except from the tinkling of the water as it lapped away from me. As I swam, the water continued to make that tinkling sound, which was only silenced when I dove my head underwater. When I opened my eyes underneath, all I could see was black. I swam silently back to the bunk and walked to the fire. I sat that way for a while until I was dry. I threw my sleeping bag and fur blankets into the tent and crawled in, pinching up my small lamp. After a little while, I could hear some wildlife come back out again. The bugs began to chitter, and I heard small animals walking around. Some kind of creature stalked up to my tent and prodded the side with its nose. I heard it chaff and turned to go back the way it came. I was trembling and quietly reached a hand up to shut off my lamp, afraid of attracting new friends. I heard a couple things moving and digging around the tent, but after a while I got used to the sounds of the curious animals and fell asleep. The next morning I could see the sun streaming in through the thin cloth walls, and I unzipped the tent to crawl out. Immediately my head bumped into something. Right in front of the entrance to the tent there was a maybe 3-foot-tall branch sticking out of the ground. On the parts that were sticking out of the main branch, there were several objects hanging from what looked like a brown thread. Upon closer inspection, I realized that the thread was actually brown human hair, and the dangling objects were small birds' claws and rocks. My breath hitched, and I immediately pushed myself into the tent and zipped it up. I fumbled through my bag to find my pocket knife when I noticed something was off. My sweater was missing. Someone had been in my tent. I heard rustling outside and I froze, pocket knife held in front of me. I counted to 3 and ripped open the tin door. The branch was gone. Whatever put that there was still in the area, and it could see me. I gathered my courage and stepped out of the tent. Almost immediately, an incredibly strong gust of wind almost knocked me over. Before I could recoup myself, I heard a blood-curdling scream, and my guts twisted as something with greasy, stinky long hair and no clothing rushed by me, inches away from my face. It had the basic body shape of a human woman, and yet all similarities stopped there. It had no mouth, toes, fingers, and the torso. Oh God, the torso! It was thin and emaciated, and it had so many ribs, too many ribs. It rushed from the woods on my left side, across my base, and straight in front of me, into the woods on my right side. I don't know where to go, what to do, and thank God awful screech was still ringing in my ears. It left a putrid odor that smelled of boiled cabbage and urine, with a sticky sweet scent on top, as if it was trying to mask through stench. I staggered backwards. The tent was sitting there, and I had the urge to shut myself up in it and never come out again. But instead, I reached and grabbed my bag. I tried my walkie-talkie and I whispered, "Grams, are you there?" There was only static. It had done something to my only source of contact with my grandma. I knew that no matter which direction through the forest I tried to take, no matter how quickly I ran, it would be there. So I took the only way that I knew would keep me away from it. I walked to the bank and began wading in. The warm water welcomed me back, tugging on my legs, pulling me in. I graciously accepted, all too aware of what was waiting for me back at the tent, what was waving to me rapidly. They found me floating towards the edge of the lake, almost a mile out from my original point. They said I was freezing, and it was a wonder I didn't have hypothermia. The lake kept me alive, but I didn't tell anyone. I knew from that night on I was never the apex predator. For years, I worked as hard as I could and made a life for myself. When they were going to build a resort on the lake, I didn't hesitate to buy the land. I live right next to the old base now. It used to scare me. The creaking boards in my house used to scare me. But now, when I'm afraid, I walk back to the dock and take a swim. I found it calms me. My grandma actually found that book a few years ago and sent it over to me. I opened it just to humor myself. Every single page was blank. Some quick backstory. I worked security for a private company. Before that, I was working at a hospital, but occasionally I'll pick up a shift somewhere else. My city was holding an all-ages concert that took place in the city square. I took the shift as we had the contact, and due to unforeseen circumstances, our field manager was unable to make it at the last minute, so he put me in charge of the officers on site and communicated with me throughout the event via text. Anyway, most of the event goes fine. We have a few issues with some people drinking and arguing, and one man who was very drunk and attempted to assault us, but his friend kept stopping him and dragged him away while apologizing to us. I had 7 officers, not including myself, as well as 8 or 10 police officers who were present and gave us a hand when we needed it. At about 12:15, a lot of the crowd is cleared out, and my officers are leaving their spots and are all standing towards the center of the stage, in front of the gate, just watching the 50-ish people that are still standing around, talking and hanging out. 2 of my officers come and tell me that at one point they noticed a short white man in his late 50s or so, just standing very close to and staring at a younger girl, probably around 20, who was very intoxicated and there alone. It was clear she didn't know him, so they decided to go stand near her, with one of them standing directly between the 2 and staring at the man. After 30 seconds of this, he apparently got the hint and walked away. Just after they finished telling me this, they pointed the girl out, and I noticed the man they described standing close to her again. I don't think I've ever seen a look that malicious in my entire life. He was just standing 3 feet away from her, while she sloppily danced and flailed herself around, staring at her intensely. He was obviously sober and clearly didn't have good intentions. At this point, I signaled to one of my other officers and we both approached. We got between them and I took the girl aside while he told the man that he was making us uncomfortable and that he had to leave. Eventually, he was told that the police were standing about 40 feet away and that if he didn't comply for us, we would gladly get them, and he walked away. I tried for a while to calm the girl down and get her a cab, but she was far too drunk and we couldn't get her to sit and stay with us. So ultimately, we just had to let her go. We kept an eye on her as she went up the street, but that's all we could really do. He had left about 10 minutes before her, and he went into the opposite direction, so I hope he didn't find her again. I still regret not being able to do more. I was kind of hoping she would have assaulted one of us, so we could have a reason to restrain her and let the cops deal with her, so she'd be a bit safer. But all she did was try to jump our fences and piss behind a garbage can, so we couldn't really do anything to help.
So this happened a few years ago and still gives me shivers when I tell this story or even think about it. I was about 12 when we, parents, siblings, and my grandma went on holiday to visit my dad's family. My family are part Bangladeshi and part Persian. They live on a farm and the land is surrounded by forests. My grandma and I slept in a room that had been padlocked shut. Later found out it was because it's haunted. Great. Night came. I fell asleep with my grandma and I wake up suddenly to knocking on the windows. These windows had steel bars in them and were covered by wooden panels on the inside, so very little light came in. The knocking stopped after a few minutes and I fell asleep again. The second time I woke up was because the knocking was insanely loud. My grandma has hearing problems and didn't have her hearing aid. But I was still shocked she didn't wake up. I was shitting myself. I woke her up and told her if she could hear the knocking. She sort of brushed it off and said it's probably a branch or something. But then I told her this side of the house was by the lake and there weren't trees anywhere near the windows. The knocking was still going, and then, all of a sudden, my grandma starts chanting and clapping her hands, slowly in threes. Honestly, I was so frightened that I just froze and stared at her. She began to blow in my face, and then the knocking stopped. I guess I was kind of relieved, but confused as fuck as to what had just happened. Being 12, I was convinced she was some sort of witch or something. We both fell asleep, and I woke up a third time. No knocking. I guess I felt a strange urge to leave the room and to go to the bathroom. I didn't need to urinate or anything. I got up and went to the toilet and stood in front of the mirror. The power went out and a small red light turned on near the open bathroom window. I was frozen again in front of the mirror when I heard my dad's voice saying, "My mom's name, come out." I just remembered feeling like I could not move. It was almost pitch black, with the red light illuminating the bathroom. The scene was something out of a horror film. My dad repeated it again, asking my mom to come out of the bathroom. The power turned back on, and I ran out of the bathroom and through my dad's parents' room towards the entrance. My dad's dad was awake and asked me what I was doing. I could not tell you how relieved I was. I went back to the room with my grandma and slept till morning. This all happened between 1 and 4 a.m. So, I wake up the next morning and my grandma's telling my parents about the knocking. I then tell them about the whole bathroom situation, and their faces were horrified. My dad said it wasn't him and that he hadn't left his room all night. For the rest of the holiday, they made me sleep in their room and kept a close eye on me. I woke up screaming from nightmares for the rest of the stay. I just remember feeling like something was just about to grab me before I woke up. Fast forward a week or two, We're home again, and my mom's telling the family about what had happened. Out of curiosity, I googled different types of ghosts, and I came across this. Nishi. The Nishi spirit lures its victim to a secluded area. The Nishi only strikes at night, and once the victim responds to the call of Nishi, she or he becomes hypnotized, follow the voice, and are never seen again. So it is unknown what happens to them. According to folklore, the Nishi cannot call out more than twice, and so no one should answer a voice at night until being called at least 3 times. I can't begin to explain how I felt when I read those words. It fit my situation perfectly. I am a rational person, and I tried to exhaust all other explanations, but I could not think of anything else. I know what I saw, I know what I heard. I forgot about it for a while, till a friend stayed over and started crying all of a sudden. I asked her what was wrong, and she said there was a black figure stood behind me. I didn't know what to think. Over the past few years, I've been experiencing more appearances from this black figure. Another friend that came over started crying because she felt like something was watching us from the French doors and all of the windows. I remember coming home, going upstairs, and seeing a black figure stood by my bed. I remember one time I was on Skype with a friend, and they asked me who had just walked into my room. All my doors were shut. No one had came into my room. They swore they saw someone walk past behind me. I didn't sleep that night. A few months ago, I came downstairs around 3 a.m. to get some cereal and heard clapping from the study room. Everyone was asleep. When I tell my mom about my experiences, she'd always get extremely worried. She said she hears me speaking all night. At one point, they even took me to see an exorcist who got shit scared by something halfway through and said he didn't know enough to help. He just rushed out and was extremely vague with everything. My family are kinda religious and told me I should pray. Being an atheist, I ignored them. To this day, I don't tell them if I experience anything weird out of fear of worrying them. A few nights ago, I woke up at around 3 a.m. and messaged my boyfriend asking what he was doing. I felt extremely weird, like I had not slept at all and had been awake doing God knows what. So when he replied, asking me who I was and telling me to stop being so creepy, I didn't think anything of it. He then brought it up again and reread the message I had sent. But I am assuming you took away his gravy and all because of now. Reply, please let her go now. I tried to laugh it off, but I could not have sleep text that because we were having normal conversation during. I have no memory of typing anything like that. It feels like something is constantly watching me, controlling me. Some nights I wake up and go to my bathroom mirror and just stand and stare. It doesn't feel or look like me staring back. It's as if I'm watching something possess me and examine my body. Then I can't remember how or when I got there. These strange occurrences don't happen often, but when they do, I always think back to that night with the knocking. I am afraid to tell anyone. I don't want them to think of me as some haunted person. Although now, that's what it feels like I'm becoming. It's just me and this entity. I would say I feel alone, but I don't. I wish I did.
This happened over 10 years ago, when I was in junior high, about 14 years old. I went to a high school in the inner city, in a high crime area with a reputation of being tough school, though my friends and I were pretty well behaved. I had these 2 best girlfriends and we did everything together. Well, one day after school, we decided to go to the McDick's across the street for a snack. While we were sitting down, we all noticed an older man sitting by himself and staring at us. He looked a little shabby and was wearing a Santa hat, which was odd considering it was only September or October. We were a bit creeped out. I didn't think much of it, because this particular McDonald's was often host to the neighborhood's eccentric, but mostly harmless homeless population. We left and headed our usual route home. We all lived within a block of each other, so we usually walked home together. A few minutes passed and we noticed the Santa Hat man was walking behind us. Getting an uneasy feeling and remembering what we'd been taught about being followed by strange men, we decided to turn left instead of crossing a major street to the right where we lived. We didn't want to lead him to where we lived if he was indeed following us, and if he wasn't, his destination wasn't likely in the more well-to-do neighborhood. Well, as you may have guessed, he did not continue on or turn right, but followed us into the nicer area. We were getting worried now and quickened our pace until we reached an interesting street, turned right and turned right again along the next street, heading back in the direction we came from. Once we rounded the corner, we watched to see if he had followed us, and indeed he had, most joking to keep up. Well, now 3 was no doubt that he was actually stalking us, so we grabbed hands and flat out ran down the block, cutting through yards and zigzagging throughout the area in order to lose him. We made it back to the major street and waited to see if he could turn up. Thankfully, he was nowhere in sight, so he hurried across the street and nervously made it home safe. I'm still not sure what the Santa Hat man, as we called him, intended to do if he ever caught up with us. I am a tiny little person, but both my friends were big and tall for our age, just about as tall as the Santa Hat man was. I think because of this, we weren't too concerned about the situation, even after it happened. We even made jokes about it afterwards. But I still never told my mom, out of fear she would never let me out of the house, and I am glad we never found out what the man wanted from 3 14-year-old girls. So Santa Hat man, let's never meet again.
To start, I go to school in Boston. For privacy reasons, I am not going to include the name of the school, but if anyone reading this also goes here, I think you'll be able to figure it out. So at the end of the spring semester last year, one of the dorm buildings on campus was closed for renovations. Since then, construction crews have been constantly working on completely stripping the building and redoing it entirely. Lately, it's become a bit of an issue because the dorm I'm living in now is right next to it, so residents are often waking up very early in the morning to the work being done. In response, the school set up a meeting for students to voice their concerns to the project manager and members of the administration here. Obviously, nothing can be done to stop the construction. They just want to make it look like they care and are trying to do something about it. I'll get back to this later. Anyways, on a few occasions, I've seen workers doing work right outside my window. There's probably like a 20-foot gap between my room and a part of the building having all the construction being done, so I have a really clear view of anyone out there. If my windows are open, I can also hear them talking. I never really thought too much of it. I expected to see people there. The weird thing is that sometimes the workers show up really late, like between the hours of 12:30 and 2 a.m. late. I usually notice because I'll see flashlights moving outside my window and hear the door that leads onto the roof opening and shutting. At first, I was a little weirded out. Why would they need to be up there that late? As it continued though, I just started ignoring it because I figured it was just some late-night crew or security that went up to make sure nothing was out of place. As I very recently found out, that is not the case. About a week ago, I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep. Suddenly, a brief flash lit up the room. I looked around for a minute and then it happened again. I looked out the window and realized it was just the workers walking around the roof with flashlights. I ignored them and tried to fall asleep. Before I even closed my eyes, though, I heard a conversation. "He's sleeping," a deep voice said. "Yeah, looks like it," responded another voice. "Tonight?" asked the first voice. No, let's wait for a little longer," said the second voice. "Whatever you say," said the first. Soon after, I heard the door shut and peeked out the window to see both of them had left. I stayed frozen in my bed for a while, wondering if they had been talking about me. I eventually told myself they were talking about a friend of theirs or something and I had nothing to worry about. I closed my eyes and fell asleep. When I woke up, I was still a little worried, so I asked my roommates if they have ever seen or heard those guys out there. Both of them thought I was joking, but I assured them I was very serious. Both said they had no idea what I was talking about. They didn't come back for another week, but before I saw them again, I decided to attend the sit-down the school had set up. When it was my turn to speak, I asked about the late-night crew. I wanted to know why they were up so late, and if it was entirely necessary, as it was preventing me from getting a full night's rest. The project manager just stared at me for a minute. "Late-night crew?" he asked. "Yeah, the guys who come there sometimes really late and just kind of walk around with flashlights," I responded. He stared at me for another minute or so. "We don't have a late-night crew," he said in a quiet voice. No one said anything. Everyone was just staring at me. Finally, someone from the administration said that it was maybe homeless people who had found a way up the roof and were using it as a shelter. The only part I was still confused about was that the people are not staying up there all night, but just for 5 or 10 minutes. I decided not to mention that part. That was 2 days ago. I didn't see anyone that night. But last night is a different story. Same as usual, I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard the door open again. This time, though, there were no flashlights. Very slowly, I strained my neck to get a look out the window while still remaining hidden. I saw 2 figures standing on the roof, facing my window. Nothing happened for about 30 seconds, and then one of them said something. I recognized the 2 voices as the ones from before. Their conversations went a little like this. "Did you get the email from Bill?" Bill is the project manager. "Yeah, looks like this isn't gonna work out, huh?" "Guess not. You think he's listening right now?" "It is possible." "Are you? Can you hear us, buddy? Are you listening?" At this point, my heart was practically beating through my chest. I didn't know how to react. I just stayed in the same position, completely frozen, hoping they would just leave. "Cut it out. We really should not be up here much longer." "What?" "I'm just messing around." "But yeah, you're right. Looks like this is goodbye, bud. Don't worry though, we'll be seeing you around." After a brief moment of neither of them speaking, they both turned to the door and walked away. I didn't sleep much last night because of that. I don't really know how to handle something like this. Based on what they said though, it seems like they won't be around anymore. Still though, these guys know where I live. I can only hope they haven't seen my face, but I think I'll be avoiding the construction area for a while.
In one corner of my grandma's living room stood a lamp that was almost never turned off. She would change the bulb every week like clockwork, waiting until the afternoon sunlight poured through the windows and filled the room. Even then she hurried, holding her breath, until the deed was done and the lamp was back on. I would ask her about it once in a while. Each time she would smile softly, tassel my hair, and promptly change the subject. I didn't learn the truth until I was 13, the first time I turned off the lamp. I just wanted to see what would happen. Grandma screamed when she walked into the darkened living room, a plate of cookies falling from her hands and crashing to the floor. I could hear her praying under her breath as she raced to turn the light back on. Tears were shining in her eyes when she turned to me, her lips pressed thin. Without warning, she slapped me across the face. Grandma has never so much as raised her voice before, and I was too shocked to cry. She cried enough for both of us, gathering me up in her hands and begging me for my forgiveness. With her face buried in my shoulder, she finally told me about the lamp. It was a ghost light, she said. Ever since she and my grandpa had bought the house, back when they first arrived in America, the spirits of the dead had plagued her. Only when her burden threatened to drive her mad did she ask Grandpa for help. She had expected him to laugh her out of the house, but he had surprised her by nodding gravely. It was he who had first lit the ghost light, and as long as that beacon burned through the darkness, she had never seen another spirit. I stopped visiting my grandma after that. It started gradually at first, missing a day here and there, but by the time I received news of her death, I hadn't seen her in over 10 years. As her only living relative, I shouldn't have been surprised when I inherited the house. Yet, as I sat in her lawyer's office, listening to him read her will, I was speechless. I had a difficult time paying attention after that, absorbed as I was with the business of remembering. So much love had filled those walls, so many happy memories. As I thought of my tiny, sterile apartment in the city, I quickly made my decision. I was almost overwhelmed by emotion as I walked through the front door. Everything looked exactly as I remembered it from my childhood. Houseplants still cluttered the window sills. Decorative bird plates still hung on the walls, and the ghost light still burned in the living room. Seeing the old lamp sent a chill down my spine. I froze in my tracks, the smile fading from my lips, and I couldn't help but think of the night Grandma had slapped me so many years ago. I had told my mother about the ghost light the next day, but she had dismissed it as simple old-world superstition. It was the same way when she was growing up, she told me, and I shouldn't worry about it. Still, I couldn't shake the conviction that I had finally seen the true depths of my grandma's lunacy. I ran my fingers through the fringe on the lampshade as I thought, a bloom of sadness darkening my nostalgia. Sighing heavily, I turned the ghost light off with a click. Something woke me later that night. I lay in bed, listening to the darkness, until I heard scratching coming from the living room. Rats were the last thing I wanted to deal with at the moment, and I rolled over with a groan, determined to ignore it until the morning. The scratching continued, constantly jerking me off from the edge of sleep, and I finally had enough. I threw the blankets off me and stormed out into the hall. Moonlight flooded the front of the house, and I didn't bother turning on lights as I made my way to the living room. I knew every inch of the house, even after so many years, and I moved confidently through the dim light. I was furious at having been woken from a dead sleep, and my anger prepared me for what I found. An elderly woman was crouched in the corner, her gaunt back to me. She was scratching at the floor where the holes met, stopping every few minutes to cock her head. A gnarl of dread unfurled in the pit of my stomach. I had no idea how this woman had gotten into my house, and though it was obvious she needed help, it took me some time to summon the courage to approach her. My hand shook as I reached out to gently squeeze her shoulder. I meant to ask her where she lived, who her caretaker was, but the words were driven from my mind when she turned and I saw her face. Her eyes were solid black, bottomless pits that didn't reflect the moonlight. Her jaw hung impossibly open, unhinged, and the dark tunnel of her mouth spiraled down into her throat. I had a moment to realize who she was, to recognize the familiar map of wrinkles in her face, the curls of her wispy hair. Then my grandma screamed. I shrieked, stumbling backwards away from the nightmare in the corner. My arms flayed in the air, reaching for the nearest lamp, and my hands touched the ghost light. I yanked the chain, filling the room with light, and she was gone. I never turned off the ghost light after that. After letting the bulb burn out one evening, I began changing it every week, just as Grandma had. Eventually I got married, and luckily for me, my wife was tolerant of my strange fixation of the lamp. The light continued to burn, and I lived my life happily enough. But my grandson has been asking about the ghost light lately. Each time he asks, I smile softly, tousled his hair, and promptly change the subject. For some reason, I can't bring myself to tell him the truth. I think about how I pulled away from my grandma, how I thought her crazy, and I keep my mouth shut. I worry though. I know I won't be around forever, just as I know he will eventually turn off the ghost light. I worry that he might see me then, twisted and wrong, scratching in the corner. My older brother used to be in a relationship with this girl. They fought a lot, but at the end of the day, always seemed to be fine. These all happened when I was a child, so I don't remember it all too well, but I remember bits and pieces of her. She grew up in a bad household. Her mother was quite abusive. She overreacted about every little mistake she made. My brother used to be a bad kid. He was with the wrong crowd, and it really fucked up his life in a lot of ways. He was a really good musician. His path was lined for him in a musical career. He could have been famous. I'm rambling back the main story. Once I remember we had to call the police on her for not leaving our property. She left in time, but that memory of her and my brother's screams echoed throughout my mind. However, it was around this time something happened. Something great. He and my father went to see a movie about a Navy SEAL. That made my brother want to join the Navy. He's still in it now. However, my parents in his eyes messed something up. Finally, my brother made one of the biggest mistakes of his life. He proposed. After the ceremony, he immediately went home and wanted a divorce. A little after this time, it was finally time to go to boot camp. When he left, she came to live with us. She rarely interacted with any of us, going to work, then home to her room. I actually have her room now. Once my brother came back from boot camp, him and his wife went to live at the base he was stationed at. This is when the real hell happened. Her entire life was based on him. He was her only stability. She didn't know how to be a person without him. When he was deployed on the ship, she went insane. She tried to smuggle drugs onto base. He sold his stuff for drugs, almost killed his dog. She destroyed his home, and there was nothing he could do about it. After all was said and done, she left. and went to be with my brother's best friend. She now has a baby and is barely making it through life due to addiction. I still have nightmares that I will see her again, and if I do, I know exactly what to do. My brother is now married and has a 2-month-old baby boy. This happened to me just last night, so I wanted to recount it while the details were all still fresh in my head. Yesterday evening, I went to the cinema with a friend after work and was making my way home around 12 a.m. or so. In my neighborhood, there's a large park that separates the two sides of the estate, and it's a good shortcut for getting to the street my house is. Now, before I go on, I should mention that I live in an extremely safe suburban town in the east of Ireland. I could probably tell you all the major crimes that have happened here in the past 20 years off the top of my head. It's known as being a place that is totally calm and very out of harm's way. I walked through this park countless times after dark, sometimes as late as 3 a.m. after a night out with friends, and I've never once come across anything weird or creepy. That changed last night. The park is very big and is mostly a wide open space. You can basically picture it as the perfect place for kids to play a game of football because there's not a lot of trees or bushes in the way. There's also street lamps or light sources. I was walking up the trail that runs along the border of the park, and as I got above halfway along, a big shape right in the middle of the open space got my attention. It was motionless, so at first I thought it was some sort of goalpost or marker that kids had left behind after playing. But then, as I got closer, it began to move towards me, and I saw it was a person. The entire park was deserted except for the two of us, and I thought it was odd he'd been standing still right in the middle of it. Most people just use the two trails on either side. It was difficult to see in the dark, but it looked like a tall man in a long coat with shaggy hair. I looked around for a dog to see if he was out late walking his pet, but saw nothing. He was just slowly striding in my direction. I looked away from him and picked up my pace, telling myself not to be ridiculous. He was probably just crossing the park and was only walking towards me. I glanced back at him and saw that when I'd sped up, he'd changed his direction to follow me, still at the same slow pace. I looked away again and walked quicker, but glanced back a few seconds later to make sure he wasn't still following me. He was, but then he stopped, turned away, and started motioning with his hands. Think about a traffic warden gesturing for a car to move forward. It looked like he was beckoning something to come towards him. I broke into a light jog for the rest of the park, looking back a few times to make sure he hadn't suddenly started into a run after me. But no, he was still making that same signal right where I'd left him. I kept up a quick pace all the way to my road, hurried up the driveway to my house, and shuddered when I closed the front door behind me. Even when I walked down through the park this morning on my way into town, I felt uncomfortable when I passed by where he had been. The experience left a bad taste in my mouth. Hello Reddit. This is my first time making an account and posting on this website. I've never told anyone about this experience, but I know that if I don't get it all out there, it will consume me. I have to get this off of my chest. I can't tell anyone I know in person, and I've been told that this community can be accepting of some less than believable experiences, So here I am. I was young when my wife Mallory and I met. We attended a stereotypical all-girls Catholic high school together, and if you had a religious upbringing, you'll understand the kinds of guilt that can come along with that. We were best friends for years, and it wasn't until right after we graduated that we realized we were both harboring romantic feelings for one another. Coming from religious families, it hasn't always been easy being in a relationship with her, but I cannot imagine my life any other way. I never understood the idea of spending my life with one person until our relationship began. She has opened entirely new worlds to me, and I have been beside myself with love for her, basically for as long as I've known her. We were young when she got the diagnosis. It took a ridiculous long amount of time for me to accept it. Weeks, even months, I'm ashamed to say, because it all seemed so stereotypical. It was like everything we were saying was pulled from some shitty Lifetime story. They caught it early enough. It will be okay. We can make it through this. We can fight this. And a hell of a lot of, how could this happen? She is so young. Because in truth, it came out of nowhere. She was 28. Eats healthier than anyone I know. Has never smoked. Done drugs. When she was healthy, we ran about 20 miles a week. I guess, even though this was a few years ago, it's still hard for me to process. The truth was, she wasn't strong enough. We didn't make it through. It became very clear within a few months that things were not going the way we wanted. She lost a massive amount of weight, had no energy. She was falling apart. It's still hard for me to think about. In the last few weeks, it was like I didn't recognize her. She was crumbling in front of me. But what hurt the most was that she was having this incredibly painful and difficult experience that I could never understand, and that I could not help her through, no matter how much I tried. I lost her on February 2nd, 2018. As I'm sure you can all understand, is not a day I will ever forget. But that's not why I'm here about. I'm here about what happened 3 nights before I lost her. As her health declined, Mallory would spend much of her days sitting by the window in our attic. It's not nearly as creepy as it sounds. We used the room as a creative space, grew plants by the window, and it got a lot of light. She would sit there and watch the birds and all of our neighbors pass, and I would spend time reading to her or just chatting whenever I could. 3 nights before she died, I went upstairs to check on her, like I did every day. Most nights I would help her get into bed, but if she had fallen asleep and was sleeping soundly enough, I would sometimes bring a blanket and pillow and lay down next to her until she stirred. Sleep is a precious thing when you're ill, and I try not to wake her when I don't have to. Try not to, I should say. Tonight was one of those nights. I didn't finish up my work until 9 or 10 at night, and by that point, she was sleeping peacefully in her chair. I'd had a long day, so it wasn't hard for me to fall asleep on the floor next to her. I keep thinking that if I had known she was about to pass, I would have actually, I don't know, stayed up all night watching her sleep, walking her to tell her that I love her. I don't know what I would have done. It doesn't matter. Like I said, it didn't take me very long to fall asleep. It was one of those nights where you don't have to lay down and wait for sleep. It just comes. So when I was awoken by the feeling of someone touching my shoulder, it felt like only a split second had passed. Sometimes, Mo would reach out to me in the middle of the night, when she woke and couldn't go back to sleep, I'd get up and help her get into bed, where we'd both passed out again. I thought it was her touch I was waking to, but when I turned around, she was peacefully sleeping in silence. But there was someone standing next to her. I don't think it's possible to really explain how a situation like this feels, unless you've been in it. For me, I immediately felt a cold sweat break out across my entire body, and my stomach sank to the point I thought I might throw up then and there. You can't think straight in situations like this, especially since I had just woken up. My mind started buzzing immediately as I thought of anything in the room I could use for self-defense, questioning how this person got into our home, what they wanted of us. Within a few seconds, I had blinked some clarity back into my eyes. The figure was staring intently at Mallory, as if I weren't even in the room. I'll try my best to explain their appearance, but please, bear with me. It won't be easy. Do you know how sometimes when you're dreaming, if you look at something too closely, it changes? Even if you're dreaming about your mother, it's like you can't quite get her face into focus. Every time you look at it, or even if you stare, every second, things seem to shift, and you can't even track it. That's how this figure was to me. They were tall, so tall they could have been standing on stilts, and wearing a long black garment that I can only describe as androgynous and Victorian. But I could not see their face. One moment they looked masculine, the next feminine. They looked old one second and young the next. Everything was vague and hazy, although everything else in the room was clear. I can't explain how I knew I wasn't dreaming, but I was sure this was real. Even though I could not see their face, after a few moments of sitting in absolute terror, I felt myself calm down. It was like it clicked, and I suddenly knew who they were and why they were here. They were here for Mallory. I could see it in the way they were staring at her, peacefully sleeping in her chair. I suddenly saw her in an entirely new way. It was like I had avoided really looking at her for months, keeping myself busy focusing on bills and medication and home care, so that I didn't have to accept how rapidly she was declining in front of me. I saw her now, her face so sunken, collarbones like knives, the rattling way that she breathed even in sleep. Before I knew I was speaking, I told the thing, "Don't." My mouth was so dry it almost hurt to speak, and I felt the wetness on my face before I even realized I was crying. I am a rational person, and I am a skeptic. This kind of scenario is crazy to me, but in the moment I knew it was real, and I dropped to my knees before whatever was standing next to her and begged. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I begged. I begged it not to take her, to let her have more time. I told about our bond, our relationship, how badly I needed her, and how badly I knew she needed me. "I will give anything," I told it, "if you let her stay." The figure didn't move for a moment. Then, for the first time, it turned to stare away from Mallory and on to me. I can't explain it, but it's like I felt it stare, like it was something tangible, washing over me like water. It gave me chills and this nausea feeling of dread, like when you first learn a secret you know you should have never known. And then it just stood there, staring at me. As the seconds clinked on, I realized that I never should have looked at it. I never should have said anything at all. How much I didn't know, what the hell I was dealing with. But it was too late, and then it spoke. I remember its words exactly. They've been keeping me up every night, playing over and over in my head, forwards and backwards, and in a jumble.
You don't want me to take her,
It said in a low voice. It came out monotonous, and its mouth didn't match with any words. It was like it opened its mouth, and a recording of the words played from a box in its throat. It gazed at me entirely, face still out of focus, and as a deep aching bloomed behind my eyes, I realized that looking at it was doing harm to my body, but I didn't look away. I don't want you to take her, I said. It nodded, its head jerking down in a short movement, and then I awoke on the floor. Mallory's hand was on my back. The figure was gone. Let's go, she was saying. I stood, trying not to let her see my tremble, and helped her into bed. I thought that maybe she was looking slightly healthier as I helped her down the stairs, as if she could beat this, or maybe that I had just experienced nothing more than a sickening dream. 3 days later, it was clear she wasn't going to beat it. It happened suddenly. I found her in her chair by the window. Her body, so young and beautiful, was taken over by age and death. It wasn't until my mother came by to check on us hours after that I was able to make myself leave her deathbed. I had cried so much that I had practically dehydrated my entire body. I told no one about my experience before Mallory's death. I had no reason to. It was obviously just a stress nightmare. It's like I said, I'm a skeptic. I don't believe in these things, or death, or even bad omens. At least, I never used to. We put Mallory in the ground a day after her death, 4 days after the incident in the night. It wasn't a moment I was unprepared for. I had played it over and over in my head. I remained composed the entire time, with friends and family even commenting that I seemed to be holding up okay. It wasn't until I got back home that I broke down. Read it? There is nothing so painful as returning to a space you shared with a loved one, only to realize that you will never share it with them again. But that night, I realized that I was wrong about that. I could not sleep alone in my bed, so I went upstairs to her space. I don't know why I did it. I think I knew it was going to be hard for me to even be up there again, so I wanted to rip the band-aid off. When I first saw a figure in her chair, I remember thinking, great, grief has made me go insane. But it didn't disappear when I blinked, and suddenly that same feeling of dread and nausea hit me again like a ton of bricks. I walked up to her slowly on instinct, like I was afraid of startling a bear or something. I was so sure that I was hallucinating until I stood next to her and saw her sitting in her chair, staring out of the window. Her eyes were glazed over, unmoving and unblinking as she stared. Her mouth was slightly ajar, as she was fixating on something perplexing or rare. Mallory? I called to her, but she didn't acknowledge me. In fact, she never has acknowledged me. Instead, she just stared. That's all she ever does now, is stare. It's been over 2 months since she died, and every night I found her in that chair. Every night I try to speak to her, and every night she gazes out the window, eyes glazed over, mouth slightly ajar. I have tried everything I can. I have tried to speak to her, to beg her to acknowledge me, to touch her. It's like her body is made of stone. Neither her nor the chair she is in will budge. If I stand in front of the window, her gaze remains unchanging. Her sightness, eyes unblinking. She cannot see me, and I know she will never see me again.
I check on her every day to see if she's still there. Every day I am met with the same vacant stare. I have even brought others into the attic, and as I expected, they see nothing but an empty chair. Well, they see an empty chair and a broken, lonely woman who cannot accept the death of her wife. But they can't see what I see, that she is trapped here, and exactly who is responsible for that. I cannot stop thinking of that night, of that figure, and what I asked of it. I put my own peace before Mallory's, begged it to let her stay, and now she's staying here forever, and she will never see whatever it was she was meant to see after life. Instead, she will gaze at nothing for eternity, and all because I asked for it. I am fearful of my wife. I am fearful of what her presence means. But most of all, I am fearful of the state of her. She is still sick. Her body still appears to be in pain, wasting away slowly, eternally. She is doomed to sit at this window and gaze outside of it, to see nothing, experience nothing but pain and loneliness and sickness for the rest of time. And it's entirely my fault.